This is Gnosis of the Body, where we explore embodied wisdom in healing the mind-body split through personal stories, using Jungian depth psychology, mythology, and following collective trends, and following wisdom stories of the body. So, welcome back, Gnosis of the Body. I am joined today by the beautiful and wise Tammy Brett, who I met a few weeks ago at an open mic, where she was reading some of her absolutely transformational poetry, and it just grabbed me, and I thought, I need to bring her on the show, and I am so lucky and so happy that she is joining me here today. Tammy is a mother, a grandmother, a magic seeker. She's on an ongoing journey to experience and enhance her magic and power within. It's reflected in her work with others. She's a person-centered CBT and play therapist. She's been working therapeutically with adults and children affected by trauma for over 20 years. Her holistic work has evolved to guide her deeper into the energetic realms. She runs ceremonies that involve breathwork, sound and ritual. She teaches energy healing, runs events and retreats in Hebden Bridge and further afield, and she loves to be a witness to the authentic core of people and to offer her own to be seen as well. Thank you so much for coming, Tammy. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me, Catherine.
Would you please start with that excerpt from that absolutely scintillating poem that I heard the night I met you?
I will, thank you. My sisterhood, we gave our blood in the 90s. We were misunderstood as we raved in the mud with an air of we don't care. It rose from our despair and we were crazy in the very best way, living for the day, letting the tunes and the ecstasy take us away. Because my first witch was fucked up, old school, retro, ghetto, Thatcher's Britain. My first experience of persecution and a big fuck you to the institution. I used to use the term witch when calling an evil bitch, brainwashed by the fairy tales, by Disney, hijacking our language, our words, our terms, our ability to speak our spells into existence. So the 90s for me became the resistance, an insistence to address the imprint of distortion that created orphans, deeply disconnected from the Great Mother. There was no explanation for the indoctrination, so we created a fascination for celebration. And without us even knowing it, we were honouring Agnes Waterhouse in 1566, the executed very first witch. We were dancing for her, with our arms raised to her essence in our adolescence, our first experience of magic, of one pulsating energy, of effervescence and luminescence in my old Raver haven. When house was a feeling, it began by believing, and it gave my pain meaning. And the witch was born, she began to take form. My journey out of the matrix into creatrix began on the dance floor. Eat off my face, salty sweat, wild hair, sticky feet, I became the beat. Pumping piano vibes, taking me back to another life. A beat as old as the hills, the drumbeat of the dawn of time, to realign and redefine. The brand new ceremonial dance, an ecstatic trance, our first chance to incant and enchant. And at home and on the streets, the wound still played out. But on a Saturday night, there was no doubt. We escaped from the jailers that tried to assail us, and the witch was born in her maiden form. We were taking it higher with fire and desire way back in the days of glory. We created our stories. Now they are my myths, my legends, my folklore and metaphor.
Yay! That is so beautiful. I love that. I love how that brought so many rich elements in of your personal story, and then how myth is then relevant to us personally, but most importantly, it brought in the story of your body and what you were living through at that time. Would you be brave enough to just share, as you choose, how you can explain your life at that time a bit?
Absolutely. So I was, at that time in my life, I was in a really violent relationship. I was quite young when I started my raving days. I was probably about 14. And there was so much going on in my personal life that was kind of left over from childhood, some learnt behaviour and some real darkness. And it was probably the time where, well, it was definitely the time where my self-esteem was at its all-time lowest. And my body as well was taking its toll on my body. I had some problems with eating, which would be described now as an eating disorder. I had lots of trauma, PTSD type symptoms in the body. And then I went to my first rave and suddenly life lifted. And it was like there was everything. I mean, obviously the ecstasy pills back then had a part to play, but it was more than that. For me, those pills connected me to the music. And what they did was they took away any fear. So the dancing became what is kind of big now in the conscious movement. It became a need to express. It became a need to kind of work through what was going on for me, and that jumping, pounding, stomping on the dance floor together with people in that vibe of pure unconditional love was something that I think I've been kind of longing for ever since.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, when I first came here to England, it was the golden era of the electronic music time. And even though most of my years I was locked up in a girls' boarding school in New England, I had the good fortune to go to a couple really, really good parties, which I was about the same age, a little bit older, and I really had no business being at, but it was so much fun. And I want to slowly break down all the elements there for those that might not be as familiar as us with what was therapeutic there for you.
So I think when I look back over those times, there was also a collective trauma in the air. And, we could argue that is kind of even more so now in some respects. But it was a real dark time in the UK, It was, especially for the working class and for those in poverty. And that was kind of my background. There were no jobs, and there was a real air of no hope. And what those times did, and I'm sure it was similar in the 60s and the 70s, and I'm sure each decade had its own revival, but the 90s in particular for me was that it gave hope, it gave faith, it gave a feeling of joy that life was worth living. And that memory, people talk about, old ravers talk about the muscle memory. And I'm kind of deep into the menopause now. I'm nearly 50, and I went through a really early menopause at 38. So my body has really kind of been through the mill over the last decade. And I often can't do what I could do with my body 20 years ago. But I get on those dance floor and those tunes come back on and that muscle memory kicks in and my body knows what to do. And it's like this energy comes from somewhere else.
I love that. I love that because this has brought up such an image of the mythic Dionysian, the spirit of the god Dionysus. For those who are not as familiar, Dionysus is really, he calls in the party spirit. So it's not just chaos, it's freeing ourselves from routine. The women who worshipped him in ancient Greece would leave the city at ritual periods to go out and be Dionysian, which meant breaking rules, being wild, getting in their bodies. There was drunkenness, there was wild sexuality, there was chaos, but it was a point of release. And what you were speaking to just there is how we as a culture needed that at that time. How, especially in the United Kingdom, that was needed by the collective. And it was to move into where I think gnosis of the body comes in, is that it's coming out of everyone's subconscious as a need from the body. This is what has to happen. This is what is needed.
Absolutely. And it's like the way I kind of visualize it is like a template in the mass consciousness that doesn't need everybody to be doing that. You know, there was enough people to be doing that to create a ripple effect, you know. And the reason I kind of talk about the myths and the legends, and when I was asked to write something for the Witches Revival, which was the year before, and I wanted to speak about being a witch because my friend had kind of described me in that way, at first I felt a little bit like, am I a fraud? You know, I don't know what all the medicines of this land mean. I don't understand all the ancient kind of sacred stories and all the old myths and legends. And even though, like the story you just described from Greek mythology, there is so much beauty that we can take. But also the journey I went on was, we kind of forget about our legends, our folklore, our myths from our lives and what we've got to give, as though these past decades in our generation don't matter as much, and that we weren't as wise, and that our stories don't have as much to give. And you touched on the element of rebellion and how necessary that is. And, you know, we look at the word rebel and it's rebel. It's changed the vibration. And I think that's what the rebels of the time do. And for me, the 90s, those that were going to those warehouse parties and those that were taking these substances and saying F you to the police, and we were prepared to dance, whether that was in fields, in service stations, in dirty old warehouses, it didn't matter. And for me, I saw literally, we were living in kind of inner city Manchester where there was a lot of crime, and the working class men were responding to these problems, these unemployment, by getting into drugs and crime. And there was a lot of gangs and a lot of gangsters. And I witnessed, and there's been some books written on this subject in a famous club called the Hacienda in Manchester, where there was gangsters that were killing each other. And the rave started and they were dancing together on the dance floor. And for a moment in time, for a few years before things changed, the crime rates went right down. Violent crime dropped significantly during that time. But it was also a time of rebellion. And for me, the rebels are leading the way to create the changes we need going forward. And that is what I class as kind of my folklore, my legends. And for me, we can take what we want from the ancient stories and we can see the significance in our own lives. And that's what we've got to give going forward.
So much wisdom in that. Thank you for that. There's so much wisdom, because I'm quite Jungian, and Jung said what we really have lost as a culture, when he was looking at it in the 1940s and 50s, and actually in the 1930s too, he said we lost ritual. And I was describing the Dionysian cult, which was a real cult that existed, and it was worshipped through ritual at times of the year, just like witches do. And witch means wise, and keeping the old knowledge of the old ways. And what you're describing in this very, because, you know, now, I mean, I hope people listening are aware of this, that time in Manchester is mythic. You know, now it is mythic. Now we've got documentaries about it, thank God. But you lived it, and those gangsters were, just as the people of power in ancient Greece were doing, they were leaving the city. They were leaving the structures of civilization and power where they were someone, and they were just becoming their bodies, just writhing, dancing, orgiastic bodies. And even the spaces in the city you mentioned, alleyways and sort of the places that are, you know, old warehouses, Dionysus actually rules over those spaces, literally.
Wow.
So the gods are with us. The gods are with us. And And another thing I want to just bring in about dance that for the audience that of course you're aware of as a therapist is polyvagal theory, and that it has shown light on different ways that moving the body, similar to the way that animals, if you've ever watched a nature video, if you're listening to this, you've never seen this, go on your YouTube and look at animals shaking off trauma after an attack. They will give a little sort of a shiver of their body, kind of like, you know, you've done the cold water challenge and they've just had cold water and they're kind of like shaking it all off. And that actually has a physical effect on the body, which is being more and more used through therapists that work with polyvagal theory. My training root teacher in yoga uses that all the time. I start doing it with private clients before a yoga session, and the best feedback I had was the first time I worked with someone who experienced continual sexual abuse and trauma through their childhood, who was a very experienced yogi. I did the shakeout and I did the eye scan around the room, because the way that we move our eyes in polyvagal theory discharges trauma and takes us out of a alerted state of fight, flight, freeze into parasympathetic rest, digest, and feelings of safety. And she said that was the first time she did yoga and felt safe. So what I'm bringing this in for is that, you know, there was collective trauma at the time in that population, and you were experiencing personal trauma, and there is very much this wisdom from your subconscious, I think, in going to dance to find a method of healing yourself that is coming out of your psyche at that time. And I wonder if you could just describe for us what it felt like to be you going into that first rave, finding that release as you described in your body. Like, what did it feel like to be you?
I'm actually getting kind of tingles and activations throughout my kind of body. I'm so kind of in tune sensory at the moment, which is, exactly what you're talking about. And this will tie into the dancing in a minute. But I had an experience with TRE. I was doing some TRE, trauma release. I think I always forget what the E is, which is about shaking certain movements when your body shakes. And I also had some myofascial release. And during the myofascial release, because I feel that I've done a lot of the work, it's a work in progress like everything is, but mentally, I think I've got the reins back over my mind. Energetically, I do breath work and other things that really helps me to clear my energy field, to be aware of those unseen realms and to work in that way. For me, there was, even though breathwork really helps physically too, there was still a missing piece that was getting deep into the core of my being to release that hypervigilance that was left in my body. And I knew I needed something physical to help the physical. I had some TRE, and I also I'm currently going monthly for some myofascial release. Now, what blew my mind when I first experienced both of these things, but particularly the myofascial release, was my jaw started chattering and shaking. And this is what used to happen on the dance floor with ecstasy. My jaw, and you talk about the eye movements, EMDR, and those type of, what we know now is certain eye movements can reprogram the brain. And those things happen as well in ecstasy. And the methods of dancing, when I look back at old rave videos, there was so much of every part, every movement in the body, every muscle, jumping, shaking, everything. It was a release. It was a huge release and celebration. And it was bringing pleasure into trauma release. So the trauma release became ecstatic. And I've experienced some of that with breathwork and also with myofascial release as well. These feelings of ecstasy alongside parts of my body literally shaking it out without having any control over that, but with the ultimate need of somebody safe holding it, you know. And where can we go with bringing these things in? There we have conscious raves are popping up here, there, and everywhere now, and people are recognizing that we can do these things without the need for chemical help, and that these practices coming forward. But dancing, releasing, I mean, I'm a big believer that energy needs to move through the body. And if we were living as we should be living, these practices would be happening naturally in the body. And I also believe that if we don't move energy through the body and we suppress it and we push it down, then that energy turns into matter. And that's what can contribute tumours, and where matter actually kind of begins to become so stagnant in the body that it causes disease, you know?
Yeah, because we live in such a culture of disembodied wisdom, of mental, and there's so much intuition of the body involved in living from an embodied, aligned place, in rhythms with the earth, in rhythms with our body. And because we live in this linear work culture, you know, where capitalism has to dominate, where we have to go, achieve, and it's not realistically possible for people's bodies or their psyches, that, you know, now we are seeing much more illness, and we need to start considering all the different places that might be coming from, that come from within us, because once again, we are not living in our embodied wisdom as a culture and not appreciating, you know, we think we are in the period of science and knowledge, and we are on many levels. I don't want to knock science in any way. We are so much better off in so many ways than we were back before we had antibiotics. But at the same time, when people like Carl Jung were saying, we don't have ritual anymore, we are not counting in the fact that it wasn't just a party, that there was embodied wisdom behind that might have had a somatic health purpose to it. And as you brought up energy, you know, moving through energy, you know, be it through dance or spiritual practice, that had a place back then that we're now just beginning to remember as a culture, as we return to yoga, as we return to breathwork, as we get into somatic therapies. Talk therapy is incredibly valuable, but we need more as a culture. We need more than that. And there's also this image that you brought up that I don't want our conversation to end without bringing this up. The beat and the embryonic nature of being back in the womb. You're in darkness a lot of the time when you go into a nightclub, right? And that you're surrounded by warmth, and you're surrounded, you know, it's noisy in the womb, right? It's noisy. Like, people are talking on the dance floor, you know, and you can hear the people over in the corners at the bar talking. But then there's this beat dominating everything, and you're hot and you're sweaty, and it
just like the heartbeat when you're in the room, when you're in the womb, the womb space and the heartbeat. And, you know, it's not by accident that the parts inside our body are called organs. You know, I believe we are one big instrument. And I also believe, just to kind of veer off, but still on topic, is I believe that in the English language, a lot of our octaves, the full range of resonance, has been taken from the English language. And other languages around the world, even, you know, the Celtic languages of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, have these guttural, throaty sounds, you know, these lower chakra resonance. And we don't get that. I mean, you know, I've got a typical Manc accent. I speak really highly. But I was aware that there was a lot of work needed to be doing in my lower body, and the sounds at a rave or a drum beat in a spiritual ceremony, and the kind of ritualistic aspect of moving together. And that was something that I'll always remember from those days. It was looking out, and it was that synergy. It was how everybody's, there was a magic there where everybody was moving in the same way. And it wasn't just that there was certain dance moves that were popular at that time. It was something that'll kind of stay with me forever. And I think that doing our own personal work on our bodies, which I know a lot of women, and I don't know one who isn't on that journey in the physical at the moment. It's definitely a collective journey. But I also think that there is a wider collective need for dancing en masse, moving en masse. We don't go to churches anymore every Sunday and sing and move and clap. And we don't have these festivals, these ancient festivals anymore when we're out on the lands and we're dancing together. And it doesn't matter what era we were born in. It doesn't matter what kind of music we like. There is something about that collective as well as personal need for this kind of movement together that I believe has an ability to transform the world.
Yeah, it's really true. That's really, really well said. And it's interesting if you think of what our worship as it is organized today, and so many people have gone away from going to church every Sunday, but those who do, it's a very physically restrained, if you looked at it from the outside, it's a very physically restrained, you stand, you sit, you act very orderly, no chaotic sounds, but the ritual is important. The ritual, it's one of the few spaces we still have, in the collective where ritual is important. So I don't want to denigrate where that exists in our world at all. But there is something so beautiful about that Dionysian release, that Dionysian coming together to be wild. And, actually just thinking about it, I think in my memory, I probably made noises on the dance floor because I knew no one could hear me. Sorry, that's my witch laugh.
I love it.
Yeah, no, that only comes with a lot of, having known a lot of dark stuff in your life and being able to laugh at it.
If you laugh that way, you can dance. I know how you dance on the dance floor now. You laugh that way with utter abandonment.
Thank you. I have been called by someone at a festival last year in Turkey. They're like, "You dance like a fairy." I'm like, "I do." All right, thanks. Yeah, I really want to, for those who know on a mind level that they had trauma, I'm thinking certainly of very specific friends, but they're smart. They might have done their therapy. They know they have trauma, but they are still not fully embodied and they still haven't fully released it. I'm trying to think, what wisdom from your story can you share about what it felt like being that young girl, not knowing with her mind that she was traumatized, what that felt like inhabiting that body of that Tammy, and what it feels like now?
So what comes to mind for me, obviously working with a lot of children, I still work in schools, and obviously the diagnosis of things like ADHD is becoming more and more in daily life. And for me, there is an empowerment and disempowerment in that, depending on the person. But for me, I wonder how many people who have been diagnosed with ADHD have looked at the aspect of how much hypervigilance and trauma is still being held in the body, and how, if for any reason they had an experience in their life where their body couldn't relax for whatever reason, especially when their body was being formed, then I am not saying for 1 minute all ADHD is trauma. But looking back at experience, I'm yet to meet one person or one child that doesn't have some form of explanation for the physicality of the symptoms of what they were experiencing. And recently I had a client who had so much what was presenting as trauma in the body, but didn't have some form of abuse or something that it could be, pinpointed on. But when we actually explored her life story, she'd been in hospital as a baby for several months. And when we look at the aspect of this, so I think it's also kind of looking at, what do we define trauma as? Because trauma has these links to abuse or horrific incidents, whether that's a car accident or it's, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, it's neglect in childhood or whatever. But a lot of us, and I was exploring this afterwards, and we were looking at the time I was in a car with 4 friends, and we realised that every single one of us had been in special care baby unit when we'd been born. We'd been born prematurely. And this was a huge thing in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s. And I totally agree with you on science. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's look at what we've learned. Let's look at what helps. But it's time to integrate and learn from what is serving us, and what is just on a surface level around science and medical care, and what is actually looking at us in a true holistic level. So you talk about talking therapies, and if somebody's not explored their life, their story, they've not stood in their power and worked through their own folklore, their own tales, their own story, their own patterns and how it's affecting their life, then it's hugely necessary to have that, whether that's with a therapist or a trusted person that can be explored with. But it's looking at everything on all the levels now: mental, physical, emotional, energetic, spiritual, psychological. It's time to bring everything in and cover all these bases. And when we look at some of these experiences, like being put back in the day where you were put in hospital as children, as tiny babies, and mothers were sent home. They weren't there to kind of cuddle and nurture their babies. It wasn't known about. It wasn't understood. And they were taken from babies directly from birth as premature babies. And they were put in these incubators away from the mother, sometimes for months. And what that would do to a developing nervous system, what that would do to a developing brain and an immune system, and every kind of part of the physical, and how it would learn to navigate that. And so I wonder how much these things like ADHD are actual experiences, and also bringing in the element of a modern day world that is on sensory overload. And like you described, it's constantly waiting for the next moment. And when we bring in all these factors, what concerns me is with the negative element of a diagnosis is, if we view that we are born that way and we will always be that way, there is no room for that to be looked at, for healing, for experience, to help change that. And I've witnessed that these things can be helped by definitely some people. I'm not kind of disputing the element of a diagnosis can be empowering. It can be validating. It can be, finally, somebody understands me, finally. So there is kind of 2 elements to this, but I would like to see conversations being opened up around how do we look back at our experience, not just traumas, but our experience as in, even if our life was unpredictable, our nervous system will have developed to be used to that, and not to relax so much. And it was a huge thing for me when I realised that for many, many years, and still now to a certain degree, that my body doesn't fully relax very often. And that even if I was watching a film in the evening, that I'd be gripping myself or holding on to something, and that memory, even though my mind and everything else about my environment, that I was happy, I felt safe, I felt calm in every other way. But that memory in the body, as though the body's still saying, I'm waiting just in case something happens, I think you said to kind of reference that back to those days in the 90s. And I think it was like the dancing and the ecstasy took that away. And it was suddenly like none of that existed in the physical anymore. And it was like your body, it was a full reconnection with the body. Every sound felt like it was coming from within. Every movement felt like there was no mental process with, I'm going to dance this way, right? I'm going to jump now. It was just completely in the moment, completely intuitive, and completely dancing to express, not to impress, I always say.
Yeah, I love that. Following instinct and intuition from the body, leaving the space of words. And I love the way that you just illustrated that, as we have in our mental health culture, that we have the positive use of a diagnosis, which is with the thought mind, right? Like, okay, we have an explanation with words here for you all. We have, let me explain, the doctor will say why you feel this way in your body, so that then we have this mental understanding of something, but that person has been living with a felt experience. Sometimes, the diagnosis gives us a logical understanding of the felt experience. There is still also a wisdom in their body that doesn't always make sense. And, I think it's being much more recognized now, again, in science, that early formative years, it's not that you don't have any memory at all. It's that you have embodied wordless memory. And so it's at a point of being known in your body that you can't explain to any therapist, So you could have been one of those premature babies, like you and your three friends in the car. And, looking on paper, you could say, well, hold on, mom and dad are still together. I don't know of any abuse, and have no other reason for how you feel. And think that time in an incubator, not being touched, not having direct from the womb, the breast, the touch, the smell, anything of your mother, that could have no effect on you. But now we really are going back to the early days of psychoanalysis, where they focused on development and seeing that for what it is. That no, that very, very early time is so vital. And I see that in new parents now doing this with, the wisdom of the body and the wisdom that the infant has. In one of my developmental psychology courses that I was here in the UK for, and I very much came to the United Kingdom because your psychology, as far as Jungian depth psychology goes, is developmental focused. The London School is developmental. And our professors had us watch a video of something I'd never heard of before, which is a baby doing the crawl up the body immediately after birth. And that if you set the baby on the mother's body, it will crawl up in eyes closed, fresh out of the womb, and it will find the breast and it will latch on. And that was just, I was like, that's incredible. If you've not seen this, please go Google it and look it up on YouTube afterwards, because that is really that wisdom, that knowing of that infant. Just as you said, it's incredible what is known within us and held within us.
And absolutely, and even kind of looking back, I know science is catching on with the kind of generational, ancestral aspects being passed on through the lineage now with epigenetics and things, and looking at kind of what was passed on through the umbilical cord. What was the experience of mother while we were in the womb? So, the experience of my mum when I was in her womb was ultra hypervigilance, was ultra having to be on guard, was no relaxation. And, looking back at the lines in my ancestry, that was something that was prevalent for a long time, for many generations as well, and I think that we've gone kind of one step with people recognizing that their bodies need some attention, and the ADHD diagnoses and all these other, it's a positive thing in people are recognizing that my body doesn't kind of fit these modern day systems, this modern day of go, 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 go. So what does it need, And then that's when there will be a call for those of us that understand to step in and to help with what is needed. So this is why the work that you're doing, Catherine, around really diving deeply into the body and what the wisdom of the body has to tell us is so relevant and important right now.
Thank you. For me, what it really is still about is just drawing attention to the need culturally for a break, which is not supported economically by our governments, by our way of life. We're in such difficult times around the world that everyone's just got to work, work, work. And just like me hitting the burnout that I hit, we need to use our embodied wisdom to find a way culturally to allow people time out, breakaway, retreat, time to go dark into our earth without having to have that panic of, oh my God, where's the money coming from for the bills while I'm doing this time out, which I don't have the answers for how we do that. But I'm just hoping the more and more I draw this into the collective consciousness that the powers that be, shall we say, will find the way for us to do that. Because in order to really heal in the body, as you know, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time, and it takes silence, and being in sensation and being in the body and present for the brokenness, because as you said, you have to lose that hypervigilance to heal and to get into it.
I totally agree about the rest needed. I read, and it was just a silly meme on Facebook, but it made so much sense, and it hit so many women, in particular around the more hypervigilance we've had in the past, the more rest our body needs now to reset. And the more that will often feel like laziness because it feels so alien to what we kind of used to. It's something that my kind of final work that I need to do on the body, it feels like a conflict in me at the moment because I'm a single mum. So I run a house and a car and a teenager, and my body after 10 years of menopause is saying at times, you must stop, you must rest. And I am much more in tune with listening to what my body needs, but I can't always heed that call because nobody else is going to pay my bills. So that conflict of sitting with those feelings and recognizing them, and the way that I manage it, and the only way a lot of us have got at the moment is to find the pauses of peace when we can, and to prioritize that. So many women that I know will prioritize cleaning the house before they will sit down and rest, for example, like how many of us have these certain rituals that can be healthy or unhealthy depending on how we view them, and these kind of like a lot of our modern day rituals in the UK will be, okay, cleaning the house, making it nice, making a cup of tea, maybe making a Sunday lunch, doing these certain things that we have a routine for. And it's like kind of ritual in some ways I feel has been hijacked. And it's like, let's get back to ritual coinciding with what the wisdom of our body tells us that we need and what feels good, what feels... because we know now, I think more than ever, whether it's just more knowledge and understanding or whether it's because the energies are higher than they've ever been and the connection is deeper than it's ever been, is that our bodies are telling us when something is right and wrong so viscerally, like literally like it's gone beyond a few goosebumps. It's like full electric body kind of tingles. And me and my friends lately, we have a saying, and if it's not a full body yes, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether it's illness or intuition, we're finally learning to listen to the intelligence that's coming from within, the intelligence that's speaking through the body. And I love how you brought up the collective, symptom that's coming up, because this was very much something in the early psychoanalytical days, the hysterics, the ones who acted out physically something really violent. And it was shocking to the very uptight, tight-laced Victorian culture that out of this corseted feminine culture was coming a very physical symptom. So the hysterics were, classically at the time, they had like a frozen limb, and they'd walk around with this frozen limb, and you'd walk them into the psychiatrist like, we don't know why, but she has this strange body symptom coming out. Because they were so unbodily. It was the beginning of our time of factories and machines. And it was the beginning of what we have now inherited is so unbodily. And there was this urgent, very demonstrative visual symptom in those in the culture whose bodies were speaking loud enough for all the the learned doctors to start paying attention to.
And it can be so simple, can't it? You know, it's literally like a friend of mine, some of the work she does is to explore, take you within, to have a conversation with your body. And we weren't doing a session or anything, but she was round at mine, and I had a crick, whatever you call it, in my neck. And it was a struggle to turn it to the left. And she said, tell me what's going on for you. And I said, well, I'm okay. Everything's great. I said, but everywhere I turn, she went, there you go. And what I was about to say was, everywhere I turn, something is going on with other people in my life, you know, and I'm needing to be there for the kids or for family members or whatever was needed. Work was calling, this and that. And it was everywhere I turn, there is something that somebody needs something from me. And it was literally like my neck wouldn't let me turn because everywhere I turned, there was too much going on. And more, I feel that the body is not trying to be complicated. It's not trying to be our enemy. It's trying to give us these clues in a very clear and concise way. So if we've got lots of headaches, have we ever looked at how clear is the mind? How clear is our thinking? How quiet and peaceful is our thinking? If our heart is racing, you know, how much pressure have we been putting on ourselves to go so fast, you know? If our gut, and we're struggling with indigestion and gut stuff, what is it we're not digesting? You know, and it's these simplicities that I feel are very accessible to everybody, that they don't need to understand. And a lot of these kind of more spiritual terms I'm kind of moving away from, because I'm wanting to bring this work into such a kind of easily understandable way so that people become more connected with their bodies. And when they've got an ailment, the first thing they do before they pop a pill or book a doctor's appointment is look at, okay, what is that element of my body? What's its usage? What is it telling me? And often the answer is much more simple than we expect.
That is such an absolutely picture perfect explanation of there is a symbol in the symptom, which is something that Jung tied onto when he was young. Say that 3 times fast. Jung tied onto when he was young. So he was at his first psychiatric internship, and the doctors were saying, like, yeah, just ignore they act crazy, their movements in the body. And he started to look at the movements in their body and ask them the story behind the movements in their body, and realized that, just as you illustrate with the neck, that there was a symbol in the symptom that had the explanation for those patients. But all the learned, you know, senior doctors over him were saying, like, oh, she sits there, and there's this one patient he had sat there and she did this weird repetitive motion again and again. And they're like, she's nuts, ignore her. When he asked her her life story, she had had a horrible heartbreak, and the man had been a cobbler, and she was making the motion of making shoes of the man she loved and lost.
That's interesting, because when I was doing energy healing recently, I started, and I didn't know why, but sewing over somebody's heart. And I didn't know at the time, but afterwards they told me that they just had a heartbreak. And it was like, it needed sewing, it needed remembering. And just another aspect I want to bring in is the answers. If we struggle to find the answer with our body, often if we get out into nature will help with that. I had an experience where we did a kind of medicine journey, which was very simple. It was out in the forest, and it was going to elements of nature to ask a very simple question. And I lay in this nook of a tree, and I spoke to the tree, and I'd been really struggling with my body. I've got a big flabby tummy and lots of stretch marks that is a work in progress for me to love. And I was leaning on this tree, and I said, how do I learn to love my body? And I sat in silence for a minute or two, and the answer was so clear. And it was, well, I'm all bumpy and gnarly, and you love me.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. So simple.
And again, the simplicity, and it was like that bigger stuff, that huge self-esteem, self-worth, body image stuff that needed more than me just sat saying, I love my body and saying some affirmations in a mirror. It needed more than that. And the trees brought that to me. And that was a beautiful gift. And it's something that stayed with me so many times. If I put a dress on and I think, oh, my tummy looks really big, then I remember those trees' words and how I look out at the trees, and, you know, the beautiful ones aren't the slim, perfect ones, you know, for me.
Yeah, there's so much wisdom in that phrase right there of how nature's beautiful to us, but we don't consider our own earth, our own bodies natural because we have adopted this image that comes from outside of ourselves of what we should be looking like, and that has created an image in our heads of that is beauty, and beauty is always out there and not in here. And it's such a important reminder. It's really beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. I wonder if you would share your other poem with us at this time.
Okay, so should I give I'll give a little explanation first of how it arose. And I've not read this poem out to many people. It's really rough and ready, and I wouldn't even call it a poem. I'd had the myofascial release, and I'd had these experiences of physical traumas that had happened to me in my life, not just through domestic abuse, but through times of extremity on my body where my body was trying to tell me something. I was shown after this myofascial release, it was like a slideshow, and I was shown a time when I was 9 years old and just woke up and couldn't walk. And the enormity of what I'd been carrying in my home life my body had said enough. And it lasted for about 3 weeks, and my body, like you talk about frozen limb, it was like that, like my legs just wouldn't work. And then it showed me times that I've had black eyes, and a couple of those were in toxic relationships, but I've had quite a few where it's literally been like my higher self going, what you're not looking at. You are not looking at something really big, that you're on the wrong path. Something really is not good for you at the moment. So I'm going to have to do something so brutal. It's giving you a big black eye to try and make you take notice and to make you stop and pause long enough. So I'd had this experience, and I'd also been for a breathwork. I'd breathed, and a gentleman that I know, which was a huge deal for me, that a gentleman had held this breathwork for me, and it was a very somatic breathwork. It was breathing in a different way than I usually do, and it was a short out breath. And what I found, even though it was difficult to get into, because a lot of my release in breathwork had been the out breath. So what this short out breath I found was doing once I got into it was taking me back into my body. And there was a lot of writhing, and there was a lot of, it was very physical. And the very next morning, I was driving to work, working in a school, and these words were spilling out of my mouth, raw as they were. And I was thinking, no, not now. But I had to pull over and I had to speak them into my phone because they were coming so thick and fast. And they came through exactly as is written. And so I see it as almost, you know, I use the word channeling, but not in a respect of feeling that I'm special in that way. I feel like so many of us, all of us have this ability, but so many of us are experiencing this ability where something is pouring out from us rather than coming from the mind. And for me, for this to be, this poem, these words were not to be performed. It was for me to speak to me. So please forgive me if it's a little bit rough and ready.
No, that is sacred. So thank you very much for sharing this sacred communication with us. Thank you.
Okay, so it's called Safe Now. An ode to my body. We are safe now. I am safe now, and you are safe now. This phase is all about freeing the fibers of my being. Sisters, I guess you can relate. There's a calling to connect with our physical state and uncoil and uncurl and unravel and unfurl. A reset, a reprogram of my systems. my immunity that gives me impunity, my defense, my strength, a repace, giving space for my nerves, my tree of life. There's no fight, no need to ignite. My branches, my roots, my trunk, a reboot. No reckless, impulsive reaction responses, no hypervigilance. A new romance in the moment with me, my vessel and me. I was geared up for life or death decision, but now I'm on a remission, a great reset. It's in my pores, my cells, my DNA is creating a new way. So to my connective systems and tissues, we release the issues because we are safe now. There's no more danger because we are rearranging ya. Every fibre, fascia, muscle, relax, retract, because we are safe now. To my blood, organs, my bones, hello. No need to rush past so fast. When the fear erupts in my dreams, it just wants to be seen. And then I visualize a stream, meandering gently through the rocks with a slow, steady flow. And to my gut, my stomach, my belly, my tummy, you made me a mummy, and we are safe now, safe to digest, to fully rest. And oh my days, have I put you through the mill, burning candles at both ends. There's a whole ecosystem in there. Hello, my friends. It's nice to meet you, and from now on it's going to be sweeter, and this time I'll feed you with care, to nourish so we can flourish. No more running, fighting, escaping. I now delight in the awareness I'm creating within me and my body and my safety. I'm sorry for being cruel and giving you dirty fuel. How did I expect to fully heal until I heard your calls to feel? We were in a trauma bond all along. How did I expect to renew without first loving you? It's ongoing work now, that's for sure. I'll be kinder now because I see you more. It's been hard to change that view through others' eyes where I've bullied and despised you. Through new sight when we're alone, I'm just beginning to bring you home. To my heart, we had a false start, but we are safe now. It's time to slow now, to calm the beat. Ba-dum, ba-dum. And my blood, thank you for speeding up in the past when I needed to know I could grab and go. I could run and scramble hastily to safety. But you are safe in this place. You are safe now. Ba-bum. Ba-bum. And oh, my bones, I welcome you home, holding those stories of scarcity in your density from grandfolks long ago. Tales I didn't even know, but they carved me, our legacy. You carried me and gave me strength. But the struggles are over now, and the stories in the bones I carry you close. We take the treasure from the tales, allowing the pleasure to live on in my bones. Now I'm grown. And to my mind, we are safe now. Oh, I've given you the runaround, the corners we've been, picked over like a vulture with a carcass of thoughts of darkness, agendas within agendas, the judging, sludging, begrudging, should-haves, could-haves, what-ifs, banished. The rabbit holes where many don't go, but we are safe now, safe to stop, to shut down as I lay aground. And as the electricity and circuitry now in symmetry in my speedy mind, it's time to rewind, unwind, unbind. No need for on guard, on edge, ready for action. There's only a fraction of the traction of frenetic, chaotic force. I've no remorse. To my joints and my limbs, we are safe now, and I sing you hymns to praise you for not falling apart when I was broken, collapsed, relapsed. You carried me, you moved me through when I could barely lift one foot in front of another. You pulled power from our mother. It rose. We carried on, plodded on with aches and breaks, but we still create. I still relate to the weakness, the knees buckled under the weight of my emotional state. But thank you for the chances, the dances, the physical romances, the adventures we've been on. We are safe, don't you know? To slow, to ebb and flow, to my magnificent organs, we are safe now. Hello, liver and spleen, all just wanting to be seen. As I howl to the depth of my bowels, I allow the kidneys to rid me of toxicity. And finally, we let go of fear and grief, of the imprint of anger. It's a huge relief. High lungs, no need to hold your breath as in conflict. We are safe now. No restrict, a refit, and ease seeping into me. My beautiful womb, you are safe now. I'm making room for you. Hello, vagina. You are finer than you've ever been, now you're seeing. And hello, cervix, my creatrix, an immortal portal to connect us to all that is. The babies you've held and grown, and the wrong interactions needing retractions. But your waters do cleanse and mend. You kept going and growing, all knowing. But your space is safe now, and we are safe now. To my lips, thank you for the quips, the quick wit, the kisses, the taste, we are safe. Thank you, eyes, my clear path realised. Thank you, nose, for smell and senses. To ears, the stuff you've had to hear. But it's all clear because now I'm not tense. I welcome my senses to a new way because we are safe to play, to recalibrate and assimilate and amplify, magnify, electrify, a regurge, a power surge. My body is an avatar, but also a finely tuned guitar, a symphony, geometry, a synergy of symmetry from the heartbeat to the vocal cords, to the organs. I give you a round of applause on my body. I can stop talking about you in the third person. You're not a separate entity or my enemy no more. We remedy a joint identity because we are safe now. It's not a race. I am safe now to integrate, and you are safe now to embrace grace, because I is you and you is I, my body and me together will fly.
I want to hoot and holler and shout like I would, but I think I'd probably scare everyone on the podcast who's listening if I did that. But woo! Thank you. Thank you. I had asked you, when I asked you to come on, the question, what messages of wisdom and support came to you directly from your body, in a sense of felt knowing, in the way that you described that poem coming to you, driving after that therapeutic exercise that was so powerfully somatic for you. That's the answer right there. You said I've got a poem that answers that question, and so thank you for that beautiful poetic answer. There's so many beautiful phrases in there, coming home to the body, and wow, thank you for that.
I wonder how many of us do speak about our body as though it's a separate entity to us, and how that concept can be used for integration. And I know I've always seen that as, I know I talk about women a lot because a lot of my work is with women, but I see this in men too. But there is a huge, like, I've got to do this to my body. My body needs this. And I think the language we use is, it is symbolic of us needing to reconnect and talk about, the aspect of our physical from the first person,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And before I let you go, I want to just bring back full circle something you'd said in our early discussion about how when you were raving, that you, in your own personal myth, you really integrated your inner maiden. What was that like for you? Please tell me more.
Well, I do deep feminine breathwork journeys, and the reason I do those is because I was shown during meditation, during a journey that I went on, that I'd always worked with the maiden, the mother and the crow. And I learned about the maga, the enchantress, the phase of midlife, of menopause that had kind of been written out, whether that was just because women were dying a lot younger back in the day, or whether that was intentional because it's where we step into our magic, our power, and we stop, whether we have been mothers or not, we stop over giving, and we begin to create for our own needs during midlife. And how this phase of womanhood is seen as where women lose their femininity, they lose their fertility, they lose their productiveness in society, where it's actually where we step into our true creative potential. So I was on a journey around the maiden, the mother, the maga, and the crone, and needing to really go back and have these initiations and have these understandings. And I was shown during meditation that there is actually 7 phases of womanhood, and they relate to the chakras. And so I do these journeys in the deep feminine breathworks where we go back and we breathe into what our body and what our energy and our ancestral needs are. And we have a kind of opening. It's a 9-month journey that weirdly corresponds with the gestation period, but it starts with an opening ceremony where we open up into our bodies, and it ends with a closing ceremony. But we go back into the womb, and this corresponds with the crown chakra. I call it the spark, which is like the spark of life, where we are a fetus and we're still connected to source and to the mother. And then the third eye being the inner child, or the fairy stage, the fae stage, I call it, which is obviously where we create. We're still in our imagination realms of play. And the maiden corresponds with the throat chakra, where we find our voice. And often it's where our voice is quietened and hushed and oppressed too. The mother phase being the heart, the solar plexus being the maga, the enchantress, the midlife phase, the stomach, the womb being the sacral chakra, being the crone, and then the root chakra being the hag, which I felt we needed another. It made sense because we're living longer lives now, and the crone fit, and these kind of initiations, which are around 10 to 15 years for each of us. So I've been on that journey to really view my life, my healing, and my work through these initiation phases, and going back and honoring these phases like we would have, and understand them from a deeper concept. So when I talk about integrating the maiden, I've been really called back to these kind of rave-like experiences again. You know, getting into things like drum and bass at nearly 50, like really like wanting that kind of really hard physical feeling in the body, and that real kind of sense of abandonment on the dance floor. And it feels like that I am going back to enjoy and re-experience what I experienced as a maiden, and these things that helped me. Dancing and raving being just one of them, but from a more healed perspective, not going back out there the next morning and being on a come down and and being back in the throes of toxic trauma bond relationships. It's like I need to re-experience that now and reconnect with what really helped me as a maiden, but also to kind of clear the negative stuff that surrounded that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I love that. Thank you so much for that beautifully illustrated story there. It's wonderful to hear. And it's making me think of festivals that I've been going to in the past few years that are, because I did not get my dancing done when I was young at all, unfortunately. So I'm trying to make up for it now. And I think we have a slightly new culture and neo-60s culture, or I'm not really sure what the culture is, but we're returning, I think, to maybe the old archetype of the village dance, where everyone's dancing at these festivals of all ages all together. And I've really, really enjoyed being, in my crazy face makeup and my crazy costumes and dancing next to a long gray-haired woman. And just having that sort of like witch wink at each other. And I think we need more of that in the culture. So that's my little plug for more multi-generational dance parties in our culture there.
Oh, I hear you. I was at the Great Goddess Gathering in Wales back in July. A friend of mine runs it, bigging up the Great Goddess Gathering. And there was a beautiful other friend, Andrea Grace, who did a Kundalini dance. And there was women, some were naked, some were fully clothed, some were topless, of all ages. And what stood out for me was I saw the beauty in all the sizes, in all the shapes, in all the ages. But the beauty that stood out the most was the elder women with the big swinging bosoms and the tummies hanging out and they looked so perfect, so beautiful in every way. And more of that, please. I'm with you there. More of that.
Oh my God. What is missing in the culture? Hashtag what is missing in the culture, people. What we need more of. Thank you so much, Tammy, for agreeing to come on Gnosis of the Body and speak to me about all this wisdom that has come from your body, from the learning of your body in your lifetime. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Just a huge thank you to you. Like I say, the work that you're doing, and, you know, just knowing that there is a revolution, you know, technology. You know, I look back in the days in the 90s, and one thing that stands out is there was no phones, there was no record. And that was beautiful as it was. But in the same way, let's honor technology and work with what we've got. And, you know, being able to spread these, just have these conversations and have these platforms, it's so needed. And it's so, you know, important going forward that we have these conversations in these way. And it's been a huge honor, you know, just to talk to you. I loved your energy immediately when I saw you at the open mic, and the words, your story, your heart, your openness of sharing. I felt like in your short 5-10 minute slot that I knew you, I saw you in that moment. And I still remember the story of you as a child on the boat sailing the world, and I had a little vision in my mind of you as your inner child, and that's priceless. Like, I think we're connecting. I've got some beautiful friendships I've had for 40 years, but we're also connecting so deeply in 40 minutes these days, like on a whole other level. And it's in a world where we see so much darkness playing out. I see it as a kind of dying animal that has its last flailing attempt of its dying limbs are swinging out, and it seems like everything is getting darker and darker. But within that, the light is shining, and it's these connections. The more we create this grid across the planet of having these conversations, these connections, these heart-opening just talks, and seeing the wisdom in everybody, you know, it's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to create the old campfire where we're all sitting around just sharing stories here. So I'm so glad that mine resonated with you that night we met. And thank you again so much for coming on to create this space with me of sharing women's stories and women's experience. Thank you again.
Thank you.